Revolution Radio.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Whistleblower Heroes, everyday heroes and educators sharing the information that you need to know here on Revolution Radio. And I'm your host, Ella. What is a whistleblower? A whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. These courageous people often suffer retaliatory actions because of their disclosures. In the end, many of these people are often the catalyst for needed change and are eventually lauded as heroes. And I'm here to celebrate these heroes and give them a voice, because shining a light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free, and just. So with me today, I have Dr. Sean Andrews. Sean, are you there?
I am. Hi, Ella.
Great. Thank you so much for agreeing to the interview. And Sean is a friend of mine, and he's also what you call a targeted individual. And so in case people are unfamiliar with that term, a targeted individual or targeted individuals are people who are illegally harassed, tortured, possibly mind-controlled, gang-stalked, and spied upon 24/7 by organized groups of people or criminal networks. Targeting can be covert or overt. So anyway, Sean happens to be one of those people. And so a little bit about him. Do you want to go ahead and give a bio and give a description and tell people who you are and what you do and a little bit about your history?
Sure. First off, I go by the name of Dr. Sean Andrews. It's a pseudonym that I use only to protect my current employment, which I value quite a lot. I'm a multidisciplinary scientist. My background is I have a PhD in material science and engineering, master's in physical organic chemistry, bachelor's in medicinal chemistry, and even another degree in chemical education. I have several peer-reviewed articles in scientific literature. I have worked on several grants in collaboration with DARPA, the Department of Energy, the NIH, National Science Foundation, NASA, and several others. Some of the work I've done has been in the development of paper-based diagnostics, where little molecules on a piece of paper, when exposed to certain analytes, say maybe cholesterol or glucose or whatever it may be, either from blood, saliva, urine, or sweat, would give a colored response on a piece of paper. Then you can measure against a color bar. So you can imagine a little piece of paper could be an off-site diagnostic tool in very remote areas. I've worked on fuel cells, so alternative forms of energy, where we take something as innocuous as water and convert it into electrical energy. I've also worked on OLED-type materials in flexible applications. So you can imagine that such technology could possibly be used in camouflage, so clothing that actually mimics the environment and can actively, say, camouflage a soldier. And as Ella said, yes, I am this targeted individual, and I've been aware of being so since about 2015. But clearly, just sort of looking back and once becoming aware, it's evident that this has been in my life for many, many years, if not since birth. And also has affected my family, and has my mother is also a targeted individual. So this may be following along our lineage for quite a few decades now.
I see. So in your case, it's not something that started at a specific time and place and date. This is something that's been going on possibly generationally.
That's right, Emma.
Okay. And so tell me what was going on in a typical day that led you to believe that something wasn't entirely right in your world, when you knew something was going on and this isn't supposed to be happening, this is not a normal world?
Sure. So most TIs will speak about their time and point when they became aware. And it's a very, it's a very emotional state in someone, because that's when they realize that the reality around them is not what they have been used to, is not what they thought was consistent. It's not what they trusted and relied on. So for me, in 2015, I was approaching the defense of my dissertation, so obtaining my PhD. And I noticed that working up to my PhD, no matter how much sleep that I received or how willing I was to just, close a chapter on 8 years of graduate school, that I would be extremely exhausted. Again, no matter how much sleep I got, and it was very, very bizarre. I could not explain it, but sort of moving a little bit forward, I tried to truck through that very bizarre exhaustion, and I started to notice some very odd events, such as living on a closed street with very, very little traffic, and having known most of my neighbors, I noticed that on this one occasion, there was an influx of vehicular traffic onto my street. Again, a very quiet street, and of say about 30 cars, 25 of them were red in color. Now, statistically, that is so unlikely, and it just caught my attention. There was also an influx of really strange people who did not belong to my neighborhood, who did not belong, I've never seen before, wearing particular colors, almost like they were color coordinating, and would usually conduct some sort of act right in front of my home. Say I was sitting in the living room, reading a book or watching TV. It seemed like these people would make it a point to conduct some act, whether that be kneeling down and tie their shoes, like right up my walkway, or just lingering around with a pet, for instance. And again, having lived in the location where I was for several years, it was, again, very, very unusual, never having seen these people. And I consider myself a fairly observant person. Beyond that, I started to get really strange incidents with, say, white or red vehicles who would just jut out at intersections and almost seemingly want to make contact with my vehicle. So I became a little bit sensitized to that happening. I noticed
so when it first happened, you just thought, wow, that's a lot of red cars. That's kind of odd. And then it happened again and again.
Well, being a scientist, I like to, record things, and what I ended up doing is just putting a little camera facing the street, and anytime there was motion on the street, the camera would self-trigger, and it would record the activities. And I say 25 out of 30, that's exactly the vehicle count that were red in this just over an hour time frame. Again, vehicles, they were not local to my neighborhood. I also had instances where I'd had street sweepers and government vehicles constantly going by, especially very, very loud ones with squeaky brakes or dangling chains. And in my neighborhood, the street would be cleaned twice a year. It'd be cleaned in the springtime, just one pass through, and then again sometime in the fall. There was a period of time where I had a couple times a day for several days during the week, street sweeper going back and forward with very bizarre high-pitched screeching sounds coming from the vehicle. And just it would make no sense for these vehicles to suddenly divert from wherever they're going to just, go down my street. It just made no sense. I was taken aback by the
when this started occurring, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just very curious. So you started to see this pattern emerge, and you're a scientist, so you're looking for evidence, and you're being objective, and you saw that this was just more than a coincidence, obviously. Did you tell anybody? Did you start to research? What went on in your head?
So I started to, first off, I'm experiencing this, and I have roommates. So surely, if I'm seeing this, it's out of the ordinary series of events occurring. Surely my roommates see it too. And I noticed that people would also sit in cars down the street, almost like. And my first thought was like, oh boy, I'm on some sort of watch list. I've done something that I wasn't supposed to, and I thought this was almost kind of funny. I was like, wow.
Well, you have a sense of humor, Sean. I know you really well, so I imagine you did try to find the humor in it. I believe that.
So I was like, this is incredible. It was almost, and I hate to use this, being that, how destructive this is to TI's lives. It was almost exhilarating in the sense that, wow, I've garnered this much attention. What have I done? At the same time, there's of course the fear, underlying fear that, like, did I actually do something wrong, or is this like some sort of setup operation? I don't know. At this point in time, I don't know what's going on. So I asked my roommates, did you see that just weird guy sitting in the car down the street, and the cars would rotate in and out, and I point out to them strange people, and they would just shrug their shoulders. So I'm thinking to myself, it's very, very strange that these are the activities that I'm seeing, and it seems like the roommates aren't seeing it, or maybe they're just glancing over it, they're considering it to be a coincidence. But what I started to notice, and these next three terms that I'm going to say, I learned as a result of later doing research and figuring out what this was. But there are three factors that made all of these instances sort of stand out. That was the frequency by which they occurred. I gave you the example of 25 or 30 cars going down my street being red. It's the duration. So, for instance, the street sweeper, how many times that went up and down my street for who knows what reason, when my street was pristine. Well, by that point, it surely was, right? So frequency, duration, and intensity. So the intensity was the force by which things happen. So whether that's the exaggerated motions of a car trying to T-bone me nearly at every intersection, or just making something inordinately loud, so that it catches your attention. So those three factors are what sort of make what happens to a TI, what seemingly might be a normal event. Those three factors are what makes these events stick out. And it's I don't even know. It's meant to get your attention, clearly. And we can go into perhaps later on.
Covert. It is covert and sneaky in one way, but this is overt. They want you to know. They want you to be aware of it.
That's right. And the moment that one red car cuts you off at one intersection, and 2 minutes later a second red car cuts you off, that is then anchored into your mind, into your emotion. So as a result, when you start to see
that's actually a psychological
the same pattern.
That's
heuristic anchoring. That's right. Huh? So, and that's exactly what the point seemed to have been. I'll take it one step further. Actually, I take it many, many steps further. But I started to notice that there were a lot of aircraft flying really, really low over my home, and repetitively, almost like they were doing circles above my home. And I'm thinking that this is like the target now of some criminal investigation. I kind of thought it was funny.
A terrorist watch list or something.
So, being that I've always sort of, exactly, Ella, but being that I sort of, was sort of an activist and kept on top of the news and technologies and capabilities, I clearly knew that all my communications would be monitored. So,
but did you consider yourself a dissident? Was this type of information, I gather you were keeping your pulse on things that were maybe not in the mainstream? Alternative media type stuff? Well,
not quite, because I've never been, the conspiracy theory type. I wouldn't call myself any,
dissident,
particularly left-leaning, particularly right-leaning. But I did follow politics nonetheless. And so from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, there's clearly, I've never been the one to exactly be on up and up, meaning that, I know how to bend the rules. I'm a smart guy. I can, I know what I can do and what I can't do. And, sort of just running through all the things I possibly could have done, none of which would ever warrant anything like this. But it's like, well, have I raised enough suspicion now that, this is all warranted, and now I'm in trouble? But why go through all this? Why not just come to my door, pull me into a room for interrogation, and let's do this through the proper channels. What it just seemed like a lot of like theater, if you will, for whatever this may have been. Is absolutely ridiculous. So being that this was going on, and me being in the know of like the cell phone interception devices, the stingrays, and so forth, what I ended up doing is I ended up just texting myself, knowing that whatever I write to myself would be a message would be read by whoever is conducting these events, right? So sort of, if I would go through that history of all those messages, they would probably read pretty funny. But I just call out things when I see it. So, like for instance, what I noticed that the planes were circling around, and what I would write is like, I can hear your planes, circling around my house, and what would happen, like within maybe 15, 20 seconds, is that some neighbor 3 doors down would just run his lawnmower at full blast to cover up the sound of the airplane circling overhead. Right, very, very like orchestrated sort of deal. So this one time during this the couple-week period here, I went to the gun range. And I don't know what possessed me to the gun range, but I figured maybe time to get my target practice up. I'm a little bit paranoid at this point. I don't know what the hell's going on. I go to the gun range. I'm the only one there, and I'm target practicing at 25 yards with a small pistol. And in the distance, I look over, and there's this very large Reaper drone just circling around. So these are this is in Pennsylvania. There are like preserves where you can go, and there's dedicated areas where you can actually go target shooting. So in the distance, maybe a quarter mile away, is a Reaper drone. So it looks dark green color. There's no like weapons on it. But I thought it was like, I didn't actually pay it much mind, which is really strange. But it's just going around in circles with a direct line of sight to me. And I thought it was maybe like someone's really expensive toy. I didn't give it much thought until I later Googled it and figured out that there are a couple different types of drones in use by the military, the DoD. One is the Predator drone that most people are familiar with, but the other one, which is a different variant that usually doesn't carry many weapons, it's mainly meant for surveillance, is a Reaper drone. So it's just circling and circling and circling. And at one point, I go and I switch over to go target practice with my rifle, and I kept looking up at it and thinking to myself, could I reach that with my rifle? I obviously did not, but it was just like, it was so irritating. I'm like, what the hell is that thing doing? I'm doing everything by the letter of the law. I'm wearing a bright safety vest that's fluorescent. I'm like on the up and up when it comes to like following every single law and rule. But this thing just seemingly wants to get pictures of me shooting a gun. Very, very strange.
Mm-hmm. That's what you inferred. Were you taking video footage of these events?
No, because at this point I wasn't expecting. I didn't know what the extent of this was. I didn't know this was temporary. I didn't know what to expect. So my first thought was not to walk around with the camera. Even though I went to the extent of taking video of cars going up and down the street, but that was simply just so I can show my roommates, do you see this too? Like, because I got a little bit annoyed that they weren't seeing what I was seeing. And when I showed them the video, they were like, okay, that's a little weird. But again, they're not sensitized to it like I was.
Right.
So their reaction was not what I was hoping for.
Well, they're saying the one event that you showed them, and you're experiencing multiple events similar. So that's
right, all day long. So it turns out, so moving forward in my life at a point in time, I tried to schedule my PhD defense, and like I said, the the constant drowsiness was unparalleled. Never felt that way before. At that point in time, I was quite fit, probably the fittest I've ever been in my life. I would do insanity workouts 2 to 3 times a day. I'd run. My diet was excellent. Straight veggies. Like for lunch, I eat carrots and celery and hummus. Like it's protein shakes. You can imagine. I mean, I was in my best shape of my life. So it's not like I was neglecting things. I was going to the doctor, regular physicals and so forth. But the very bizarre sleep, especially when it came to working on my thesis, my dissertation, that kept me from making as much progress as I wanted to. So I had to cancel my first defense. For the second defense, I got some very bizarre virus. I don't know how to describe it, but the headaches that I had were incapacitating when I was curled up in a little ball. Anytime I moved, my head would just pound to where, again, I would be incapacitated. And I was hospitalized. The doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me besides noticing that my white blood cell count was elevated. They did a spinal tap. They didn't find anything wrong. And it was a mystery to them about what was going on. The third time I had to cancel, postpone my dissertation, and my memory slips me here, but there was another very odd reason why I had to. Well, I'd rather not discuss that. I would prefer not to discuss that moment. But upon the fourth time, I was finally able to go ahead and defend my PhD and obtain my degree that I worked for really hard. In the meantime, I had, well, you know what? I don't think it would be fair to your audience for me to hold back. So that third time, my roommates went to the university and told them that what I had mentioned, that I thought I was being followed, and I noticed there were strange people walking up around, and they filed for a warrant to have me evaluated. So
unbelievable.
Yeah.
When you need support the most, and that's what you get.
So right. So my girlfriend and I just came back from dinner. We were having a great time. And she walks in. I forgot something from the car, so I go out to the car to grab it. And as I look up, there's 4 police officers walking out from the darkness. They just parked their cars on the street. They actually emerged from the bushes. It was very bizarre. I don't know what they were expecting, but they took me in, and I spoke to. They didn't tell me what it was for, other than the fact that they had a warrant, and they had to take me in. So they take me in, and I speak to all the people they're supposed to evaluate, and the 2 of them that I spoke to, they thought nothing was wrong. I've since pulled all their notes and all the records, and it was very clear that they thought that I did not have any sort of mental imbalance or whatever it may be. But there was a shift change, and a third head physician read the warrant report and just overruled what the evaluators thought, and went straight to admission into a ward. So at the ward, I spoke to the head psychologist, and again, the feedback that I got is there's nothing wrong with you, right? I don't know why you're here. So what I ended up doing, and I ended up just trying to get on everyone's nerves, and I did so by.
I just have a quick question. You must have been in a state of panic because all you're doing is sharing the truth.
Well,
you're this rational person. You're a scientist. You're working.
Yep. And the only thing that saved me, Ella, is that I found out what a targeted individual was 2 days before that day, the day issued the warrant. Had I not known,
how did you come upon that?
I was Googling being followed by red cars, and harassment, and it kept coming back on this term of targeted individual. I'm like, what is this? And I start reading, and there's this this one article, I think on Before It's News, came up, and it's like 4 parts and starts to go through step by step of what this is all about. And I see that in the end, the end result is to have you incarcerated, to have you sent to a mental health ward, or have you to make you dead, if you will. So having read that, and then having realized that, oh crap, right, I am now in a mental health ward. This is do or die for me. This is I have to try my damnedest to convince these people that I am not out of my mind, that I'm perfectly sane. And that's exactly what I did. So not only did I do that, but I went around just to purposely annoy them so they can discharge me as soon as possible. I went around and I tried to play doctor with everyone else who was in there. And it was also very strange is during that time, the life flight, the helicopter, was seemingly positioned over my bedroom. And it would just sit there idling with its blades on, and my entire room would be shaking for hours. And I would ask about it, and they're like, yeah, it does that sometimes. But it just seemed like, why would the helicopter just idle for no reason for hours on end? It just seemed very bizarre.
I also had people... Yourself, this is a lot of money they're spending on me. Why are they doing this? This doesn't even make sense. Because to a rational person, even yourself, being objective, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, and that's the question that's always the hardest for any targeted individuals to answer. And I think that before I answer that question, we should probably get into some other topics. But let me just go beyond the wording. I got out.
Just want to give you a little.
So just to go beyond the wording, I got out. I earned my PhD. I stayed at Penn State, and I did a postdoc. So I was hyper vigilant. Oh, by the way, when I was released, with a personal signature from the head psychologist saying, this individual suffers from no mental illness. So I was totally cleared from. There's nothing wrong with me. What I'm seeing is what I'm seeing, and I made it a point not to discuss any of it while I was there, because I understood that the objective of whatever is going on is to make someone seem like they're paranoid delusional, paranoid schizophrenic, if you will. So I understood that had I reported what I had been seeing, that I would come across that way, and that would have been a problem for me. But sort of moving forward into the next year, I noticed that there was computer tampering. And having been a computer hacker many, many years ago, when I was younger, in the days of like DOS and, very rudimentary computers, Windows 3.1,
kids are not much different these days. That's what the kids do for fun. My middle schooler kids. I'm like, no, that's not okay, guys. I don't know. The kids like to do those things, I guess.
What I found out is there was repeated attempts from this one IP address to try to get into my computer, to try to access my shell on my Mac. And when I did an IP trace, I found out that the source was the Pittsburgh Supercomputer Center. Now, there are about 30, 40 supercomputer centers in the United States that we know of. This used to be one of the fastest. It's now in the top 10. But it is partially funded by the DoD. And it was very intriguing to me that why would the DoD, or why would the Supercomputer Center want to keep trying to access my shell, my computer, continuously? I later filed a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request for that information, and of course I was denied for several reasons. And I can probably read those off to you later on in the call. I've had Black Hawks just hover over my house, and I have proof of that because with all the aerial harassment, I ended up buying a transponder antenna, an ADS-B antenna, and that would give you not only the transponder code on the aircraft, but its speed and its altitude. So one form of over harassment was just to scramble a military aircraft and just have it hover over my house. And I have, I later petitioned for records on that. Again, I got categorical denials for that information. I got overt harassment. Just everywhere I went, there was police or firefighters or EMS, kind of like whistleblowers would report. I've had tons of email tampering, especially ones that are important, ones that were related to work. They were never received, or there were like certain words omitted that were really important. I got street theater, the harassment I'm sure a lot of your audience is familiar with. Vehicle tampering, from repeated flat tires to scratches and just parts in the exterior just randomly break. I've had bank fraud. I've had payments like salary checks that seemingly got stopped somewhere along, the transfer, and the bank could not explain what was wrong. And that happened a couple times. So, it's, and then there's the last factor, which is probably the most severe and the one that affects me the most even today, and that's electronic harassment. And we can get into that into some detail if you like it. But
sure, just so people can understand what that is. So basically, you're in your home somewhere, or you're at school or at the university, I should say, and you are feeling pain to your body. So I take it the first time that happened, you probably thought it was just some kind of physiological reaction to something. I'm not sure. What did you think when you felt?
Yeah, pain, burning, palpitations all over the body, muscle twitches, tingling on the legs and so forth. You get like pains in your mouth or like around your gums. You get twitching of your eye. You get the sleep sensation. All very destructive to a normal way of life. And I didn't know what to make of it.
From it? I mean, when did you realize this was some kind of weapon, that some through the wall weapon that you weren't able to see? How did you figure that out?
So again, having just come across the term target individual, and being that I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher at heart. What I do is I research exhaustively. I was actually voted number one researcher at my job of 19,000 people just 2 weeks ago because of the number of hours that I log researching things, work-related, of course, but just gives you an idea of the propensity that of my ability to search things out. So, of course, I went into shielding methods, and I started with Mylar, so those emergency blankets, and grounding them, and that seemed to help. And so I started to piece the puzzle together about what was happening, what could be the possible sources, and so forth. And to any audience member that you may have, Ella, who thinks, well, how can you be targeted inside your home? It sounds crazy. Well, I would just remind you to just sort of think of what's in most people's pockets. It's just the cell phone. I can go into a bedroom in my house and get perfect cell phone reception. I can transmit 10 megabytes a second of data. I can go into my basement and get the same reception and the same transmittal. I can go and travel 95 miles an hour in my car and be able to have that transmission of electromagnetic frequencies to and from my phone, no matter where I am. And it goes to the sheet metal of your car. It goes to the walls of your home. It can go through brick or concrete of your basement, right? And just like your cell phone can transmit, well, you can imagine that if I had a really highly focused radio frequency source pointed at human flesh, it could cause these effects. To give you another example, just think about your microwave. Your microwave is tuned, and I got to be careful here because it's not exactly accurate. People often say, the microwave is tuned to the frequency of water. Well, not quite, and I can go into the technicalities of that. But your microwave effectively is radio frequencies that heat up any food that you have that contains water, because it makes the water molecules hot, and your food will cook or heat up, and so forth. Well, cell phone towers operate on very similar frequencies. And just like a microwave can heat up a potato, It can also cause a burn or a muscle to twitch on the human body. Electromagnetic frequencies can be very, very powerful, can be very, very damaging. We've all, I'm sure most of your audience here is familiar with the dangers.
Well, it's kind of split. I do have the audience from the other podcast, but then I have a lot of non-TIs or just open-minded people who are alert and aware and want to know the truth that's being hidden from them.
So, in my research, I came across, even at Penn State is actually where one of these labs is located. It's called the Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Lab. And what they study is exactly these types of weapons. But the thing is, even though that there's this laboratory, what's evident is that these weapons are everywhere. And what I'm saying is I can travel to a random location that I don't disclose, just get in my car and drive somewhere, right? And no matter where I am, I will be hit. Now, I have apps on my phones that will tell me if there's any private air flights in the air, any military air flights, any drones or so forth, and oftentimes there won't be anything. And I'm still getting strong burning sensations at random points in my body, ear ringing, tinnitus, palpitations and so forth. I could be in the middle of the woods. And, if you just sort of start to think that through, what could be the one possible thing that could hit you wherever you are? Now, there's certain areas where I can get away from it, and I'll go to that in a second. But the one thing that covers most of the surface of the United States is cell phone service, right? And what we see now is that we see these panels, these microwave panels, these cell phone towers being erected just about everywhere. Everywhere you look, you see these long rectangular panels on the side of the buildings, on government buildings, on standalone towers, and they're now even being disguised. They're being made to look like pine trees, or innocuous objects are being color-coded to the building color that they're mounted on, so they don't stick out. But they're everywhere. They're absolutely ubiquitous. One of the few places where I will not get targeted would be, for instance, I went to Poland, and although I was targeted in most of Poland, when I went underground into a salt cavern on a miner's tour, if you will, it was one of the few times when I was able to feel relief. There are certain areas where, say, I'm surrounded by water, that I feel relief from whatever's attacking me, if you will. But just sort of going back and looking in the grand scheme of things, electronic harassment it's very, very prevalent. A lot of TIs complain of it. It can take many forms. It can also take the form of sexual harassment. So just like I can cause burns on the surface of your skin, or cause you to feel dizzy, or give you the tinnitus or the sleep sensation, it can be used to target someone sexually as well, and we hear a lot of complaints about that. It's all very, very sick in nature.
Microwaves. Just trying to educate people on what microwaves can do, or radio frequencies, is cumbersome.
Yeah. So that is one of the most troubling aspects of being a targeted individual, is that even behind the walls of your own home, you are not safe. There's, just to give you an idea, well, you're behind the walls of your house. I can't look into your house. Well, that's not true, because these same frequencies connect as a radar, a through-wall radar. So,
militaries have that. How long? The militaries have that for quite some time. So it's just something that's become available to people. These criminal groups that do this, the criminal networks, or the government, or whoever's behind it.
Right. And the accuracy of these systems is so good that you can actually see someone's if you just look at your left hand, your wrist on your left hand, and you can see the pulses of your heart. These radar systems are so good that they can actually detect that little tiny movement from your pulse on your wrist. That is the level of accuracy the systems have, and they can be, that same technology can be run through a cell tower or through a mobile device, such as these mobile units that law enforcement now has for see-through wall radar systems. But furthermore, now the systems are becoming, although they're not nearly as powerful or high resolution, there are now cell phone apps and modules you can attach to your cell phone that can do the same thing. And they're sold as, so the law enforcement editions and so forth, they're sold as search and rescue. If someone's trapped in a collapsed building, you want to be able to find them, right? But that's a bunch of hoopla. I mean, it's too easy just to employ these weapons and exploit them, and there's no oversight over them for the mere fact that most of the manufacturers of these weapons have their clients, law enforcement, sign NDAs where they're not allowed to, so non-disclosure agreements, but are not allowed to disclose any, not only possessing these devices, but any information or even information that they have any association to the companies that sold them these devices. So you can petition for records as much as you want, but you're not going to get them because there's an overriding NDA with the manufacturers. But what I'm saying here, I mentioned law enforcement. This is several levels above law enforcement. And here's where we get to the question you asked me a few minutes ago, why me? This whole TI program, target individual program, that's the question that when you try to explain to someone what's, as a TI, what's going on to you, the question is, well, what makes you so important that someone would spend all this money, all these resources on you, right? We have to look at this on a larger scale. And what I mean by that is, what value is there to targeting someone in such a way? So I think that the value is the experiment in and of itself. So where I am the subject, where another TI is the subject, and you're conducting experiments on them. Of course, these are unethical, non-consenting experiments, but effectively, you are trying to change that person's behavior to effectively control them. So if we look at accepted methods of experimentation and testing, not necessarily human testing, but let me just give you a comparison to show you what the power is of human experimentation, especially non-consensual human experimentation. If Big Pharma, right? Big Pharma makes about $300 to $400 billion a year in profits, and for say antidepressants, they rely on the mouse drowning test to induce depression. The mouse swim test. So what that means is, in order to test our drugs or antidepressants on a proxy for humans, which is, say, the mouse, what they do is they put that mouse in a little vat of water, and that mouse will swim and it'll swim and it'll swim. There's no ledge, there's nowhere for it to go out, get out, and it'll have to just keep treading water and try to swim to stay afloat. Well, at some point, that mouse just gives up. When that mouse gives up, the medical standard is to say that mouse is then depressed. And then you can treat that mouse with whatever experimental drug you have for depression. And the mouse, whatever response the mouse has, is supposed to be a proxy for what the human response would be. The point here being that the tests that we have to proxy that of a human are piss poor. They're atrocious. They're not accurate. So being that a big pharma spends all this money on experiments just like these, what do you suppose the value of human experimentation is? Right? And to what extent to what extent would they go to obtain data like that? And I'm not singling out big pharma. This whatever's happening to us. This is at much higher level. This has to be at government levels. with the amount of things that I've seen done, the amount of controls, the strings pulled, the resources being used, scrambling of Reaper drones, Black Hawk helicopters, this is DoD DHS level, and it's worldwide. This will follow you in every country you go to, virtually.
There's that big debate too. Is this the government, or is this because the military-industrial complex has trillions of dollars pouring into it unaccounted for, and they do have a budget and they do need to spend it. Apparently, somehow they have to. And so sometimes you wonder, are like, say you see the black helicopters, are those being subcontracted out by an organization, or is it just what it seems to be, the government sending them out?
So oftentimes, when I noticed that I was tracking flights, and so it turns out that DHS had a fleet of 120 airplanes, little Cessnas mostly, like Cessna 172s and 208s and so forth, that were owned by shell companies. And these little Cessnas had very high-tech surveillance equipment, and they would just circle areas or targeted areas very intensely. So if you look at them on a map, where like the airplanes have little electronic trails of where they've been, you see these really tight concentric circles over a really small area, almost like it could be someone's house, or even over protests like Black Lives Matter. They would scramble these airplanes. They would circle them really, really, really tightly. Again, these were surveillance planes, and through some great reporting, through a friend of mine of the North Star Post, he was able to uncover that there were these several shell companies that DHS employed to hide the fact that they had these aircraft and employed these aircraft. But when I started tracking these flights and getting tail numbers and figuring out, and sure enough, I was able to cross-reference some of the ones that were circling around me to the ones that were on the published list by reporters. But what they ended up doing, and this is to show you the level of influence that whoever this has, what they ended up doing is they ended up diverting flights, regular flights, like commercial flights, over my airspace. So in airspace, in aviation, there are these highways, if you will, right, where most commercial flights will fly within this small corridor, and they'll stay pretty consistent. Sometimes you have flights going, not exactly on those, air highways, if you will. But what I've noticed is that they will actually divert commercial airplanes to fly through certain airspace. Who has that power? Does a contractor have that power to control the FAA? To have a tower call into a flight saying, here, I need you to come in through this approach as opposed to that approach. Or I need you to divert this many degrees in that direction. It just doesn't make any sense that this would be anyone else but, higher levels of government, DHS and DoD.
Okay.
So going back, to human experimentation, I think it's important to again, I think I did that, is to highlight the value of what that does. So how can you control someone's life? Not just one person, but say a population, to get them to do what you want. It's a form of social control. Everything they do to me is to make me spend money and make me impoverished, so that I lose friends, so that my quality of life is nothing, so I had no success, and so forth. It's it's oppression in the most vicious sense, right? And, there's some of your audience members, who maybe are disbelieving because they believe that all of the laws in the United States protect them. I would just remind them that that's actually not the case. So there are several laws, I'll name them. So the National Defense Authorization Act, the Patriot Act, many of you have heard of Section 702, the Freedom Act, which is the updated version of the Patriot Act, and even the Authorization for Use of Military Force. All of these acts, these laws, effectively can make anyone subject to to being classified as a terrorist or what they call an unprivileged belligerent. You can be placed on a watch list, and any laws that you would have that to protect you would go away. They could supersede all of that. So at last count, and they've stopped, sort of this information has stopped coming out. At last count in 2016, there were over 1 million people on the watch list. Now, you have to ask yourself, do we have, 1 million people in the United States who are terrorists? What's the standard by which someone can be elected to be on a watch list? But the answer
Sean,
is
just wanted to interject in there something really quickly. I interviewed a retired FBI agent. He said, we'd get these terrorist watch lists, and I always wondered what they did to get on them. They hadn't broken any laws yet, so why are they on the list? What's the indicator? So they were always, him and the people he worked with were curious how people ended up on those lists.
So the bar is, and I can state it in just one sentence, is that any reasonable suspicion that a person could be involved in terrorism is sufficient, and irrefutable evidence or concrete facts are not required. So that means that, Ella, I could go to the online and do the anonymous FBI tip thing and say, Ella's a terrorist. And you could very well land on a watch list by me just saying that. But again, concrete facts or evidence are not required.
Well, I'm on that list, so I'm very curious myself. Well, I know how it happened, but I'm part of this club, and people are like, how you interview all these really fabulous people, famous, acclaimed, blah 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 blah, and their stories can be validated online, and you're interviewing targeted individuals. I'm like, I am a targeted individual. I know firsthand that this is real, and we're working on building up enough evidence to present it. It is real. It's just a complicated, complex topic, and we're doing our very best to bring it to light.
So, give examples of human experimentation in history. A lot of us here have heard of Project MKUltra, which involved giving mind-altering drugs to people to see what the psychological effects would be. We've had mustard gas tested on soldiers. We've had several surgeons throughout our history, government-sanctioned surgeons, doing all kinds of atrocities, from testicular explants and then implants to extricating the brains of newborns, especially those, some of which were strictly based on race. We've had chemical sprayings on cities. So in one case, there was a bacteria that was spread all over the city of, I think it was Tampa, and to sort of simulate what the effects of chemical warfare might be. We've had cases where the U.S. infected another country en masse with STDs. So Guatemala is one of those cases. We had a lot of radiation testing, especially with Manhattan Project. We had prisoners in Vietnam and so forth injected with Agent Orange. We've had operations where we've transplanted, so taken German soldiers in the World War II era and taken all their scientists and brought in all their technology to the U.S. and actually made those soldiers and scientists among the internal ranks. So all that German research that you may have heard of in that time, we cannibalized all of that information and kept those people among us, at least in the military ranks, if you will.
Sean, do you mind, in a minute here, we're going to be going to break. Do you mind staying with me through the break, and then I'll bring Matthew on, and we can finish up, and then Matthew and I can finish off the conversation. Would that be okay with you?
That's perfect, yep.
Okay, so go ahead. We'll just keep going until the commercial break.
So history is littered with all of these examples. We had examples going up into the 90s, and then there was a lot more information control there on after. But we have whistleblowers coming out. Edwards.
There it is. So hold on just a minute, Sean, and we'll be back, and I'll have Matthew on the line with me. Everybody stay tuned.
You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back, everybody, to Whistleblower Heroes, and I'm here with Dr. Sean Andrews, and I have with me joining us is Dr. Matthew Aaron. Matthew, are you there?
Yes, I am. Is the reception okay?
It sounds great. You sound crystal clear. So we're discussing targeted individuals, and both of these gentlemen are targeted individuals. And so since you're now joining us here in mid-conversation, would you mind giving a little bit of your background to share with everybody, to kind of get so they can know who you are?
Okay, well, my name, my pseudonym, as Sean used as well, my pseudonym is Dr. Matthew Aaron, but I will say that my real name is Dr. Matthew Arnegard, and I am in the process of being more candid about this, and there may be an interview that has wide viewership coming out in which I used my real name. And I've even created kind of a bubble of allies around me at my job, and I've tested the waters, and I have people around me now that are giving me are believing what I'm saying, and so I think the day will come soon when people can talk openly about this. Although up till now, and even still now, I have used that pseudonym for the same reasons that Dr. Andrews used it, and I think it's been a good decision up to this point to do that. That's how horrific this crime is, because victims can't even talk about it without risking serious retribution, career-wise, psychiatric retribution, and so forth. I have a master's degree. I have a master's degree in environmental toxicology from Virginia Tech, and I have a PhD in neurobiology and behavior from Cornell University. I also have, I think I'm around 35 peer-reviewed publications in my career, many of them in top journals, and I have done work on sensory systems, which is very relevant to electromagnetic targeting. Also on bioelectricity, electrical excitability, and because I studied, my PhD was in neurobiology, and I'm also a geneticist, and more recently I have started working in a more broader health-related sense. That's about it on my background.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So, regardless of your background, it doesn't seem to matter. People end up targeted, and so here you are. And I know that you have worked very diligently in trying to expose this in a credible manner. You're a very level-headed person, obviously. You're a very highly intelligent person. So it's great to have someone like you trying to bring this information forward in a credible manner. Because, you know, as we both know, there are a lot of TIs out there. They're across the board. Some of them are homeless. I know, I've spoken with them. Some of them are in very high levels. Some are in the entertainment business. So it's amazing the variation of people that become targeted. And so before the break, we were discussing, you know, how this could possibly be happening and why it could be happening. And maybe before we get back to that, can you give us like a short dissertation of your experience in Canada? Maybe 5-10 minutes?
I'm unfamiliar with the concept of short dissertation, but I'll give you a synopsis.
That's true.
It's just a little joke. My dissertation was over 300 pages, and the report that I wrote on my targeting was 500 pages. Okay, a short synopsis. Do we still have Dr. Andrews on the line?
I hear him.
I'm here.
Breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sean, jump in if you want. We can make this a three-way conversation. And that was an incredible recounting that Sean happened to know Dr. Andrews personally, so I'll just call him Sean. And I've heard the details before. And one thing that Sean did not convey is that along the way, maybe he did not convey it fully, he has collected evidence of what's happened to him. And even though these crimes are made very difficult to collect evidence, we have a number of people in the community independently who had no knowledge of each other before collecting bits of information here and there. And that was an incredible recounting. I've heard many other people tell the story, their personal testimony, so to speak, very similar to Sean's, and I have no reason to doubt it. However, my targeting, and I don't mean to challenge them, but I'm all about candor and integrity. So I will tell you that my targeting situation was different in some respects, although it shared a lot of similarities. And in a nutshell, I also have some evidence, some of it rather convincing, although, again, keep in mind that evidence is very hard to collect. So I'm going to have to paraphrase without going through all the evidence as Sean had to. So I'll just say in a nutshell, and that when I moved to Vancouver after working at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center and doing my postdoctoral training there, I moved back to Vancouver. I had lived there before during an earlier postdoctoral experience, and I was taking a consulting job, and I just happened to move into an apartment that was situated across the alley from a group of people that were engaged in targeting and engaged in targeting others. And it took me some time to realize what was going on, but from the get-go, I saw very suspicious, bordering on and actually grading into criminal behavior in this 1190 Hornby Street across the alley. And my fascination and curiosity and knowledge of what was going on is what got me targeted. So my targeting was from a more basically a criminal group being what looks like it's being run by kind of a local financial elite in Vancouver. However, police officers and paramedics definitely participated in my targeting. And so that group of organized criminals definitely makes use of corrupt police officers. I'm not willing to go far enough as to say that this was in my case, a sanctioned government, a secretly sanctioned government program, but it was certainly an organized criminal group that had corrupt people wearing the badge and, being a community level, forward-facing representation of the government, working with them. And I was targeted very heavily with a range of electromagnetic weapons, which left all the bioeffects that Sean summarized happened to me. I have. In addition, there were a couple of times when I was targeted through the window of my apartment, and the glass in the window was somehow changed by the beam that passed through it, leaving a ring resonator stamp on the window, essentially. And people might that evidence has been, I would say, has gone a long way to being mostly validated. It's internally validated by me also, because the same ring resonator impression, I was looking at at what looked like essentially a beam weapon, beam, B-E-A-M, or a microwave weapon, a putative microwave weapon being aimed at me when I was hit, and the same ring resonator impression was also burned into my eyes, much like an arc welder. If you look at an arc welder without protective goggles, it will leave an after image, and only this after image persisted for 24 hours in my visual field. And I also collected some very interesting evidence out of the walls of my apartment. And so all signs point to me moving into a unit that, by its proximity to this downtown center of organized stalking and electronic harassment, my apartment was actually rigged up. I believe it was rigged up before I moved in to basically assist in the targeting, because my apartment was within view of this downtown center. So
which was,
what I
though,
conclude,
I know you say, one quick thing though, even though you say you know that you believe it's to be a rogue, it was a federal building, right?
The Immigration Canada building was.
Okay.
Yes, that is. I try really hard. I'm not a softie when it comes to. I'm not trying to avoid running up against the government. I'm not trying to be soft on the government. However, I like to, because everything with targeting is so murky, I try to set my bar really high. And for me to make conclusions on things, I have to have, for myself, a pretty good reason to. So, yes, it is true that the Immigration Canada building was adjacent to that building. And it wasn't one and the same building, though. It was connected to it.
I see.
The building because of proximity, because my targeting, the obvious motive in my targeting was, I believe, again, this is an interpretation, but it's based on 2.5 years of experiences, photographs, bits of pretty compelling evidence, photographs of burns, photographs of perpetrators, people hiding in camouflage suits on the rooftop, and so 2.5 years, not just an offhand speculation. So, but still, it's an interpretation. We're not in a court of law, but I feel that I moved into an apartment which was kind of used by that system to sadistically mess with people, which unfortunately seems to be part of this targeting situation in a lot of cases. That it's done not for a clear motive. It may be experimental experiments in social control, but it seems to also really spill into just these people doing it. They just get a kick out of it, and they kind of need to keep doing it. Energy weapons have what's called deep magazines, so it doesn't cost them anything to keep targeting people. And once they choose a target, they don't pay the incremental cost of additional risk of exposure if they keep targeting the same target. In fact, as Sean said, their method is to make you look crazy, so it actually pays in their criminal method to continue targeting the chosen target. So I believe that I was sort of accidentally or by random chance came into the gravitational pull of an existing harassment network, which gives me really good insight, because for 2 years before I got really targeted, I was making constant observations. I'm also a scientist, and just like Sean, I was documenting, keeping a journal. When I see something interesting, I don't run away from it. I run towards it until the energy weapons are brought out, and then I run away. Okay, yeah. and then the energy weapons were brought out, and at what seemed like lethal force at times. I never died, but it was torturous. I can say now, I never thought I would say this, but I am a victim of torture in Canada. I was tortured in Canada, and there was an almost lethal force, a perceived lethal force, and at that point, my targeting from that point until I fled Canada only went 6 weeks, and I ran. And another important observation that is consistent with me running up against a kind of a lower sort of criminal group that is using these similar methods and techniques with some assistance from corrupt police officers, is that when I fled Canada, the day I fled Canada, yes, I was pursued right across the border, right into Seattle, more energy weapon attacks at the bus station in Seattle, but then with the help of friends and family, I went underground for an entire year.
Let me stop you just for a second. Hold on, let me just stop just for a second. So you're saying you're being attacked during the time that you fled Canada and you were heading towards Washington, and you were on a bus, is that correct? Or different types of transportation?
Yes, I'll answer that in just a second. So let me just finish my thought. And I just wanted to say that since January of 2017, am I getting this date right? No, since January of 2016, the January 28th, 2016, when I fled Canada, I have not been targeted at all since that day. So I just wanted to make that clear. So the bottom line is that there are energy weapons are real. I am 100% on board with everything that Sean said. But also it seems like this idea has now spread out, and a lot of people are getting into this business. It must be lucrative in some sense. But to get back to your question, yes. But
but I wanted to. That was only part of the question. My question was: So if someone's a non-TI and they're listening and they're like, okay, he was being targeted while he was, escaping Canada, fleeing, heading towards Seattle, Washington. How is it getting targeted? People on the bus with their canisters? I'm sure they're wondering how that is or how that occurred.
Okay, sure. I'll try to answer that. And again, we're in a murky area, and this is why these weapons, whether improvised or military grade, whether CIA grade or homemade, these weapons are exceptionally dangerous because they leave so little forensic evidence, and because the general public is not even talking about a system and a situation and a crime that is already affecting tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. But it's important to know that the weapons have a range of power levels and effects. And so in many times the harassment is not much more than just electromagnetic nuisance. At other times, you think you're going to perish, and you get burns all the way deep into your body, and you get incredible injuries, but still that leave rather faint lesions on your body. But when I was followed, by the time I was followed out of Canada, I was already in my notebook. I think I tabulated, like, by that point I had been hit over 2,000 times with directed energy weapons. I was keeping a log, and I had even discerned different categories, whether the beam was consistent, a continuous beam, whether it was a narrow beam or a broad field, and whether it was a pulsatile. Sometimes they can hit you with a pulsatile less than 100 milliseconds, probably less than 10 milliseconds pulse of energy. Okay, so on the bus to Seattle, and at the bus in Seattle, we were down to the jobless, seemingly drug-addicted, drug-dependent young adults, the army of young adults with their portable devices. That's what they were using on me. That's my perception of it, and I gather that perception because, for example, at the bus station in Seattle, I was clearly targeted. My picture and my location were clearly disseminated to people, but an army of like wandering idiots showed up at the bus station, and some guy with a white guy with dreadlocks and bits of straw in his hair with a giant army backpack doing this ridiculous, like, circling around me. And I quickly noticed that every time he points the back of his backpack toward me, I feel the uncomfortable, presumably pulsed microwave field going through my body. It's very uncomfortable. But that's not a life or death situation. And in that situation, in that free field public situation, all I have to do is step to the side, and I'm stepping out of the beam, and then that idiot has to repoint. And so very quickly you realize that as you're moving around, this idiot, and you're the only two people in a vacant part of town after dark, is doing everything he can to point the back of his backpack at you. And then I said, I'm waiting for my cousin. My cousin didn't really know what was going on. So my cousin didn't know I felt an urgency for him to pick me up. So I move over to the Tesla motor repair shop in that part of town, what's called Sodo, south of downtown Seattle. And it's completely like an industrial area, no residences at all, and it's completely vacant at that time of night. And I'm standing in front of the Tesla business, which is also shut down, and a single car comes down the road. I didn't really make anything of it, but the car decides right when it gets perpendicular to me to careen into the gravel parking space that I was standing in. And I had to jump back. I mean, there's like 50 parking spaces on either side of me, completely empty. And he careens into that parking space, already an aggressive move, already a threatening move, and potentially endangering my safety. And then I realized very quickly that a thinner beam, which feels like it cuts into you like a knife through hot butter, only it doesn't feel like an actual blade. It feels like an electrical blade, comes right into my viscera, basically. And I'm pretty sure that there was a device mounted on the front of his car. And again, easy to get away from, but then that person, steers their car around to face me again, and I feel the beam sweep onto me. So that's the best I can do. It's not proof.
You just have to.
It's not proof.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out to the listeners, because we kind of jumped ahead a little bit and very quickly, your experience. You left everything. You had set up a wonderful life for yourself, job, you were successful, you were kind of at the peak of your career and everything else. So this was so horrific that you left everything. You left it all. You went undercover. You disguised yourself, and you were able to get away. That is getting away from this is something I don't hear of very often. But the way he did it, he left everything. And as I said, he was one of the people who were successful, but he didn't do it lightly, and he lost a lot.
Well, there's a lot of observation bias in this group, in this issue. So, for example, I believe that most people who are targeted for a brief period of time and then get away from it, why on earth would you ever go around talking about that? Because it's not generally regarded as a real phenomenon. You can actually get yourself a psychiatric diagnosis for, a psychiatrist. I had I was dragged in to a psychiatric hospital as well. At one point, I just had to call for the police. That was before I knew the police were definitively in on it.
Correct.
Yeah, so I had some interactions too. And a psychiatrist, I don't want to get into the details of the story, but a psychiatrist essentially yelled at me once and said, "If I hear any more talk of microwaves, I think that you need a month in St. Paul's Hospital." He screamed that at me, So back to the sort of like the observational bias. It may be true that a lot of people are able to get away from the targeting when they get targeted by these more localized or regional criminal groups, but we're not hearing from them. Mm-hmm. I'm just sufficiently violated and pissed off that you're hearing from me.
Yeah, it is. It's an obligation. When you know that, number one, people have children. There's a beautiful future, we hope, for people. And with the way technology is going on so many levels, it's frightening. Technology has just reached a point where it is frightening to everyday people like me and you. So I think it's very important that people become aware of the dangers of technology and the abuses of power and the abuses of the technology that the powerful have, the powerful elite, the governments, these various groups. It is something that needs to be addressed. And it is a very complex topic. We're just kind of scratching the surface of the things that we know, but we're trying to just simplify it in a way that makes sense. Even now, it's difficult to convey and maybe to believe, but maybe not. Do your own research. It is real. I've talked to, I don't know. I've talked to maybe 1,000 people over the past couple of years that this is happening to, and there's always similar threads. The bottom line is it needs to stop. We need to and it's through public awareness that we're going to be able to at least expose these type of programs.
Well, okay, there's no question that this is real, and we can get into the logic. You can erect a simple logical argument supported by mainstream accounts, especially with these energy weapon attacks in Cuba and China. And anyone who thinks about this issue and delves into it at all should be convinced that this is a real criminal problem. Even if the government is getting involved in this, they're acting criminally, and they're threatening actually the eventual stability of our country, because this is not a winning strategy for a democratic country.
Would you care to go into that further and elaborate on that? Can you elaborate on those?
Let's do that in a second.
Okay.
Just in a second, because you said technology is the problem, and I just wanted to respond to that. Clearly, technology is a problem, and is in some ways the root. It's the root of this situation. But I'd like to clarify that just a little bit, because it is the pace of technological advance and the capacity for an individual to be educated. Those are drifting apart from each other, so that as we go forward, the average person knows less and less about the range of possible technologies that are out there. And police officers are very average, okay? So are psychiatrists outside of psychotropic drugs. So technology is an issue, but what the core of the issue, as I see it, and it is rooted in technology, but the real core of why this is happening is because of the nature of these weapons makes them highly deniable, okay? Because they leave so few traces in the environment. If you shoot a bullet in the environment, it leaves traces, obvious traces, casings, slugs, damaged infrastructure. These weapons can be used leaving almost no trace. You have to catch them in the act, which is incredibly hard to do. And so that allows
deniability.
But it also allows people who should be protecting public safety, institutions and agencies that are charged with protecting public safety, but do not, if they're in the know about this, but this is too complicated, too politically charged, too steeped in classified technology, even though some of it's being improvised by people in their garages, perhaps. It allows those public servants to deny. So it allows the criminals to deny, and it allows the institutions and agencies that are supposed to be on top of this kind of stuff to deny. And that's what makes these extraordinarily dangerous. And so I would say deniability is the core issue of why this is such a problem.
And the way they orchestrate these events, it's designed so perfectly. The nature of these crimes are so ludicrous that who's going to believe someone? Of course, now more and more people are believing people, but so that's starting to crack a little bit because there's just evidence. People are recording. People do get burned. There is evidence, and there's also too many people coming forward experiencing the same type of tactics.
Well, the whole, so I've basically put forward, we have a nice sort of comparison between Sean's account, which matches many targets have situations like Sean, and I've given sort of a contrasting view that's overlapping in a lot of ways. But if both of those crimes, they're really one and the same. It's just that basically corruption, they're possibly one and the same, and that now, there's almost, it's hard to distinguish corrupt government from organized crime. That's possible. That's likely. But once you have energy weapons and the modus operandi of making people look crazy because you're using a weapon that leaves no or very little forensic evidence, once you have that as your modus operandi, then all of the other stuff flows from that as an obvious complement. So gang stalking, the red cars, gang stalking probably predated electronic harassment, perhaps, but I mean the two fit together perfectly, and so it's no surprise to me that different groups might be employing these same COINTELPRO like tactics because they just work with radio frequency energy weapons, gaslighting, and heuristic anchoring. I mean, a radio frequency harassment device is the perfect harassment device because, and this was done to me a lot in Vancouver. Anywhere I went in Vancouver, even one of these very low power devices that just gave me like a little buzzing and tingling feeling on the surface of my skin. Obviously, the signal was also passing into me, but the thermal pain was only being experienced on the surface of my skin. That's like swatting away a fly. It's not that bad, but what it does is it tells you, oh, there's hundreds of us, if not thousands, and we're watching you. We're still on you, and you can't tell who we are. So it adds up. The cumulative effect of getting pelted with those electromagnetic, pellets from slingshots, the cumulative effect of that is torture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to get Sean's input too. Why don't we, you asked me about, I mentioned the Cuba thing.
Yeah, I really would like to elaborate on that because that is something even non-TI send me YouTubes on, or they find the association or the correlation, I should say. So I'd really like if you two can discuss that for a while. We're at the halfway point for this hour, so I just want to give you a timeline.
Right. Let me give a little 10-minute overview, and then I'd like to get if Sean's still there after I finish, I would like to get his take on it. We're not sharing stories. This is a totally impromptu interview, and I think both Sean and I have impeccable integrity, so he won't hesitate to disagree. His area of expertise and mine are very complementary to each other and different because I have more the biology side and he has more the technology and material science side. So the way I look at it now, I'm so glad I did this. It took a year. I documented what happened to me. I have a background in sensory biology and signal analysis. My whole PhD was done on signal analysis, Fourier analysis, digital signal processing, and sensory systems. So I was able to describe my targeting very precisely in words. And approximately, it took me about a year to write that full account because it's not like I was making things up. I had a journal of notes, but I documented everything. By the way, I can name, because of the proximity and location and my observations, I'm a rare target. I could name the leaders of the group that targeted me. It's not worth doing that, but I mean, that's how I know exactly who targeted me. And I documented everything, and I sent it to the RCMP, the mayor of Vancouver. That was kind of a joke because I actually knew, knowingly, I thought, this mayor probably knows what's going on, and he's probably maybe connected to it somehow. He's in a position where that he could be connected to it. And I sent it to the chief of police in Vancouver. The RCMP is like Canada's FBI. I also sent it to the FBI. Mm-hmm. And this was 8 months before the Cuba stuff. It was right around the time that the Cuba incident was happening, but it was 8 months before any of those factors became publicly known. And my description matches phenomenologically and experientially and on a symptoms level, it matches pretty much exactly what the diplomats reported were happening to them in Cuba. And I reported that 8 months before any of that information was known. Now, more recently, I also sent, based on some other evidence that I took out of my apartment, I actually sent it to every high-level State Department official in diplomatic security, from a high level all the way up to President Trump. I sent it. Now, back in the day, before any of this was happening, do you think if this stuff wasn't real on some level, that kind of, my report is titled Vigilantism and Terrorism with Directed Energy Weapons, Emerging Global Threats to Public Safety, Human Rights, and the Rule of Law. Now, if I sent that to essentially 20 extremely high-level government officials and 6 U.S. senators back in the day before any of this was going on, I think I might get police knocking on my door. But they can't do that now because this is actually happening. And the events in Cuba, to get back to Cuba, and now China, and there's even a report from Uzbekistan, these reports are called sonic attacks, in air quotes. And that is because an acoustic experience, a very loud acoustic experience or auditory effect, is reported by essentially every victim. And that is also true of targeted individuals. Same exact thing. And there's a scientific basis for that. Pulsed microwaves, by heating up and allowing your brain to cool at a certain frequency, very, very high frequency, certainly not as high as microwaves, but a biologically relevant frequency. Say that you pulse your microwaves at 8,000 pulses a second or 5,000. That's going to heat and cool your brain at the same frequency, which is going to set up a standing wave in the soft tissue of your brain, which then propagates because your skull is around there, and your skull is connected by bone to your inner ear apparatus. And so all you have to have is a very slight vibration in your brain tissue, and you can hear it. But you're not hearing it from outside your head, you're hearing it from inside your head. And
do you have any layman's terms for that?
It's called having your noodle rattled. That's the layman's term. But a little bit more scientifically than that, it's called the microwave auditory effect or the Fry hearing effect. Alan Fry was one of the discoverers. Yeah, go ahead.
So, Aaron, I just want to sort of highlight something. So, we're here talking about correlation, right? So, here we have an example in the news where there are diplomats in the U.S. Embassy being attacked in Cuba. We have examples in China. And we actually have a historical example where the Moscow Embassy had its transmitter dishes pointed at a U.S. Embassy for over 10 years, where the ambassadors and so forth complained of general malaise through that entire decade. And not until there was further testing that they realized that the source were actually those transmitter dishes. But I just want to point out that we're talking about correlation where we have examples to now refer on, not necessarily that Matt's experiences were related to something, right? So I'm just trying to draw a difference here.
Okay, I hear where you're going with that, and I got a little bit. If you ask me about targeting, a lot of painful stuff comes up, and I sometimes get a little far afield because it's really not fun to talk about this stuff, but. Okay, so let me try to bring it home for you.
Thanks.
In the argument that I'm trying to raise. First of all, I'm trying to see if the conclusion is supported, not that diplomats are being targeted with electronic harassment using microwave weapons. I'm trying to see if there's support for a conclusion of maybe there's enough evidence for government agencies and Congress and local governments to start paying attention. Okay, so the burden of proof is lowered. I'm not going for an absolute proof, and I'm trying to see if it's reasonable to say, hey, wait a minute, as a society and as a government, we might want to start paying attention to this. Okay, so that's my burden is lowered, and yes, it's correlative evidence, but so in a nutshell, it's this. First of all, you have the point that energy weapons, radio frequency, anti-personnel energy weapons have been under development for decades. They have been now are in active research phases, and there are even military weapons, and as you said, through-the-wall radar, which is a similar technology, in deployment, if not actual, documented use. Okay, so the energy weapon market is massive, and along with that comes the possibility that all the waveguide components that facilitates that kind of a market are also available just in general. Just even with the wireless industry, we have the raw materials are there. That's
Matthew,
point number one.
I just want to let you know, we only have 15 minutes left, so I'd like to spend let me finish up real quick. I want the last 5 minutes. I'd like to talk about what we can do to be proactive and help.
Okay.
Just so you know. Okay.
Okay. I can wrap this up. I mean, we clearly, this is a huge topic. We have to blast through it. But okay, so energy weapons are real. That's point number one. Point number two is that a very large number of people for a couple decades now, but really spiking after 2010. You have literally thousands of unconnected people around the world alleging some kind of energy harassment and assault. And it is not in their interest to be alleging this. It is not fun to be alleging this. Something might really be amiss if you're actually alleging this, because it's like a self-takedown when you allege this. Okay, so, and before the Cuba events happened, you have thousands upon thousands of people in different countries, unconnected to each other, speaking different languages, alleging this kind of assault and harassment. Then you have the Cuba events. The Cuba events happen, and the State Department is kind of on the hot seat because, apparently some prominent individuals were targeted, and they weren't believed at first. But the State Department, by law, has to take care of the safety of its employees abroad. And so, Congress and the media actually finally paid attention. And they come to find out, upon looking further, that these people are not alleging energy assaults either, because they actually received traumatic brain injuries without any blunt force trauma. And they also had high-pitched ringing in their ears. And the fourth point is that there is a clear route for energy weapons to induce that high-pitched ringing in your ears via the microwave auditory effect. And fortunately, some people with expertise have also started to make this potential link. Okay, and then okay, so you take those points. You take those points, and I'm just trying to I am trying to conclude that there is enough suggestive evidence and enough of a propensity or weight of evidence to say something might be amiss, that society and law enforcement and government might want to start taking a look into. That's all I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Just to tack on to Matt's point there, the fact that these weapons exist is irrefutable. So if we look at several military publications, whether it's from the Joint National Weapons Lab or any of these academic papers from the naval schools and so forth, without doubt, these weapons exist. The one tie that we do not see is, they're used in the context of, anti-aircraft type weapons or anti-vehicle type weapons, but no connection that we do not miss, that we do not see, rather, is biological effects. So you don't see connection or application there, and of course that's done on purpose. However, what we do see emerging, and I stay on top of the literature when it comes to what's published in like the naval graduate schools and so forth for leads about the technological capabilities, what we do see emerging here is counter-directed energy weapon protection. So although there's no direct correlation coming out how these weapons can be used against other people, we do see that a growing concern that now perhaps other countries or other factions might just turn the weapons back on the people using them. So it is a concern there. But just again, jump on Matt saying, we certainly have proof that these weapons exist. What we don't have proof of, in a sense that we can prove it to the world, is the exact emission sources and how vast it's being applied to the population, and how anyone can be targeted, which we kind of saw with the Cuba attacks, which now, it just shows that it doesn't matter who you are, you can also be a victim.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we're concerned about, because of this mass spread that's starting to occur, because it's exponentially more and more people are coming out of the woodworks, and with more and more people coming forward claiming that these type of things are happening to them, it can only be kept quiet for so long. Go ahead, Matthew.
Actually, you know what? We could stay on this topic for another hour. There's a lot more to say, but given that we only have less than 10 minutes left, maybe we should switch topics to what you wanted to talk about at the end.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about, what we're, because this is getting to be such a real issue, and people finally are starting to understand, that maybe the government is not the most, is not what we thought. They're not always necessarily here to protect us, and they might be involved with this. They might be complicit with this, and there's also criminal networks that are using these tactics. It's kind of, regardless if it's the government or the criminals, it's all criminal. It's all criminal behavior that's happening, and the laws are being broken no matter who's committing it. So it is important that people take to participate in exposing this, and to pay attention more to what's going on in the world. And we have some examples. I'm going to go around the table. I'll start with you, Matthew. What are some of the things that we can do? And as you and I are both, maybe want to talk about the campaign a little bit, because we're going to have a website up where people can download some great flyers to share with people to use as an educational piece.
Well, the essence of okay. I've always said, if these delivery trucks go around towns with fairly large energy weapons in their cargo holds, having one overturn on the highway and a bunch of people take pictures of it would really help our cause. So short of that, the essence of what we really need is, short of someone from one of these perpetrator groups finally having a conscience and coming forward, what we really need is to have enough people start talking about this, because the counterpoint that's always given is that the one that was used in Cuba, and it will face TIs, because the Cuban diplomats in Cuba and TIs are kind of in different baskets, just because we don't have the State Department on our side. But mass delusion and mass hysteria will be used as a counter argument against us until widespread public awareness on this, and it's really difficult to counter that. But what we're working towards is just getting enough public awareness And I think if a critical number of people, and especially credentialed, credible people, not necessarily credentialed, but credible people and credentialed people start talking about this, it might raise concerns. Because I believe that if a reasonable person with an academic mind, and anyone in the general public can be that way, really starts to take a look at the facts, it is hard not to conclude, Houston, we have a problem that could really be bad for the rule of law and for society. So public awareness is one, but it's a really frustrating effort because I talk to people about this. I've had very good luck talking to people. I've talked to mid-level State Department employee. I've talked to a mid-level Justice Department employee. I've talked to people working at the NIH. People believe what I'm saying, but there's still no reason for them to care. And so I'd like to see us, I almost wish we had demonstration units. We need to build a demonstration unit, and, probably we'd get locked up for that. And, the sick irony would be that we would get locked up for building an improvised directed energy weapon just to show the problem. But I'll pass it on over to Sean.
Steve,
I'll say,
if we have a little more faith in society, maybe some people just sense there is something going on. There's tens of thousands of people saying something. So, and we talk about our organization a little bit, so they can go on in a week, and you can download handout. There's a shortened version and the unabridged version, and they're put together so well. And I just want people to have that opportunity while it's going to be in one video.
Sure, I'll say it really, really quickly. So we have an organization called freedomfortargetedindividuals.org, and that's the URL. And we have, fortunately, a donor with quite a bit of money, and we're engaging in a communications campaign. She's also targeted. Yep. Go figure. That's how you become interested in this situation. So we have a communications campaign that we're launching next week, and as part of that, I'm redesigning the homepage, and I'll probably put it up by Monday. So by the time this recording is out, or if you're listening, Monday the 25th, and I'm designing that as a synopsis for the first contact person in the general public who's never heard of this issue. And I'm also making flyers that are downloadable. And, yes, the public relations campaign will work eventually. We're like ants tearing down a mud dam. There's a lot of us, and eventually we're going to tear that thing down.
Yeah, but we're going big. We're doing something that no one's ever done before because of this woman who has donated some of her money to help with this campaign, and me having a background in advertisement, and I have Sean and Matthew's been working with me. We've been working together closely for at least a year. So this should be a really big campaign, and I'm hoping it's going to start in LA. It's going to go to Vancouver. Right. Washington, D.C., and then we're talking about Chicago, just in the major cities. We want to keep this going. We want this to become a real conversation until it becomes a reality to people who aren't familiar with it.
We're trying a multitude of different things. A lot of different things are, I think, there's certain things that are misguided. Wild conspiracy theory mixed in with this, and it's very easy to do that, can be a little bit self-destructive. But Sean and I both spoke at the first annual conference for targeted individuals last fall, and that's something. Sean, do you want to speak on that a little bit? You want to close up by giving 2 minutes? What would you do? What do you think we should do? Another effort besides public awareness campaigns.
Yeah, so I just want to, before I go into it, we talked about bringing public awareness, but we also have to realize that the people who are doing this to us own and are able to manipulate normal communication channels. So the news you see on TV, it's, there are several issues there I didn't touch upon in the first hour, but, we have to sort of create our own voice. And we've been doing that not only through Ella's and Matt's campaign and their websites, but also through this one conference that we had last fall where I believe it was quite the showing. 60, 70, 80 people ended up coming through throughout the weekend where we shared presentations, ones that were sent in and also in-person presentations. But more importantly, we all got to listen to each other's story and sort of augment each other's voices. And the narrative that came out of there was that everyone had a really great time, and really they did. There was on-site lodging. But everyone walked away knowing that there's more people out there just like them, and that message hits home when you're in person. So we just need more of those sorts of events going forward.
That's right. And remember, we're all connected. This is one world. We, not to sound like a hippie, but we do need to care. This could happen to you one day. It could happen to people you care about. We need to make it a safer world, and we need to be alert, and we need to be aware. Everybody take care. Till next week. Please donate to the station, freedomslips.com. And thank you guys. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. I appreciate the interview.
Thanks,
thanks a lot. Hey, Sean, let's try to get together and see if we can do another conference this coming fall.
Absolutely.